A man moved in next door, and I'll always remember how wonderful it was to live alone in that new apartment for the first year. The arrangement of the apartment is essential in comprehending the incident. The most significant aspect is that there is only a wall that separates my balcony from his balcony. There's a substantial gap of 2 feet that allows you to move smoothly from one to the other. I had a lovely lady who lived next door to me for the entire first year, and she never crossed the balcony threshold without asking. Just to let you know, I wasn't worried about someone filtering my space. The first time I saw this new neighbor, he was loading his groceries into the designated parking spot next to mine in his enormous truck. While I was driving up, he and a girl who appeared to be his girlfriend were loading boxes from Costco. Upon exiting the car, I observed them talking, but they went silent. I nodded off, advanced towards my elevator, and the person ran up behind me, threw some boxes down, and pleaded with me to remain still. There's no issue. I'm a good neighbor. Don't mistake me for someone who is nice. The girlfriend refused to make eye contact or speak to me while in the elevator, but he introduced himself and became extremely chatty. Within the 45-second time frame required to reach the floor of our apartments, he inquired about my feelings towards the place, my hometown, and work location. Looking back, his enthusiasm was a little odd, but I just thought he was excited to be in. To preserve the balance of the story, we can refer to him as Sam. Sam, who was 33 years old and stood at 6 feet tall, had a slim build with short hair that appeared to be very coarse, as if to hide his baldness or some other type of issue. From what I could gather, he was quite ordinary in appearance. In the beginning, we had frequent encounters, and he would frequently make small talk while calling me Miss. Even though I never saw his girlfriend after the first night, I would occasionally hear him talking to a lady in his apartment because of the thin walls. After 3 months of moving in with Sam, my boyfriend and I are currently spending the night on the couch watching movies together. At this moment, it's possible that it will be around 11:30 p.m. My couch is positioned against the wall that I am sitting beside Sam, and we hear some loud banging sounds. The first thing I think about is that he and his girlfriend are getting into it or something like that. My boyfriend and I laugh, and we try to mute the sound a bit so that they can hear us. In addition to the banging, the neighbors start yelling. The sound of objects being thrown, glass being shattering, and other sounds are muted, but there is a distinct sense of anger and sadness within. My boyfriend, who is a gym enthusiast, steps onto the balcony with 2 people and then uses his voice before shouting, "Is everything in the room okay?" After a few minutes, the girl unlocks the sliding glass door on Sam's side and apologizes, prompting us to leave it alone. I'm extremely anxious, but we have no knowledge of the truth and we opt to go to sleep. A major blunder. Despite my alarm being raised at 3 a.m., my boyfriend refuses to wake me up, and I'm not prepared to let anything go while others remain silent. I thought about contacting the police, but my tiredness made me feel like I was in a dream. I deeply regret that choice. The next day, I woke up to some terrible personal events and put the night's events on hold. Despite not forgetting, it didn't cross my mind. Take a look back of roughly 2 weeks. On this extremely warm day, I'm reading a book outside while wearing my robe, sports bra, and shorts. I'm seated in a chair that faces away from Sam's apartment, making it difficult to see either side. I'm halfway through my book and suddenly feel like tapping on someone's shoulder. After standing behind me, Sam asks if we can have a moment and speaks briefly. The man who has just jumped over the balcony on my side is already in danger, but I have to ask him what's going on because I can't seem to get up close to my door without making contact. He inquired about the place to get some weed when it was his birthday, as I had the impression of being a girl who enjoys partying. I informed him that the best dispensary in our state, where marijuana is legal, would be located through Google, but I didn't bring any with me. He proceeds to explain his excessive drinking last night, and I'm so hungry to have something to hide. He gestures towards my shoulder, as if to indicate that I'm finished talking, and then claims that he caused damage to my car by scratching it while being wasted. He speaks all of this with a smile on his face, almost making jokes out of it. My children are causing me anxiety, but I'm determined to stay away from him and avoid injuring myself by blowing up his car. He claims that if I give him my number, he will transfer the information to his car insurance, but I didn't want to risk damaging myself by not doing so. Initially, I made a nervous joke about knowing where he resided and suggested knocking on his door to obtain his insurance if the damage was severe. He replies that he will be aware of the situation by leaving his information on my door. After that, he steps away from my balcony and expresses his desire to pay me in cash without the need for insurance. I spend roughly an hour deciding whether or not to go down and examine the damage. It appears to have 2 brand new extended scratches on the driver's side door. Insurance should be contacted immediately as they are not deep or deserving of such assistance. I had no desire to engage in any meaningful activities with him, so I decided to deal with the scratches. At this juncture, I recognized that something was amiss with him. As far as I'm aware, nothing abnormal happens on this night. The next day is a Saturday, and I'm at home watching an action movie alone on the way home, just in time for 11 p.m. My cat is making noise on the couch while I watch a movie, and it's quite loud. It takes a little bit of water to get my attention before I hear this banging noise coming from the hallway in my apartment. My cat had woken me and made me feel extremely agitated, which is the only reason I cared about it. When I reduced the volume of the film, the banging became more and more intense, causing me to stand up and hear 5 words from people who don't want to hear it come through their door. Open the door for the police. Then I fell to the ground with my stomach down. The previous day, I had been dishonest with Sam. I was completely intoxicated by marijuana and had consumed a joint outside the balcony approximately 20 minutes before. As I struggle to answer the door without stumbling and fearing my safety, I'm feeling extremely anxious and nervous. My memory recalls checking people and seeing a cop's face before entering the house and encountering 6 officers, all of whom had their guns drawn. I'm in only 5 seconds of getting my pants to squirt and completely terrified, holding on to the belief that I'm in trouble for smoking a joint. The officer in charge can detect my panic and immediately informs me that I am not at risk. Let us have a conversation with you regarding your neighbor. My entire being is in a state of intense tension when we finally get inside. Despite permitting the police to enter, my heart remains unceasing. The policeman in charge inquired if I had encountered Sam. I informed them that I have limited knowledge of him and that he lives by myself, having only moved in a few months ago. I inquire about the justification for their presence in my apartment. Although I'm scared, I have a negative attitude towards law enforcement and believe that I should be informed about the reason why 6 police officers brandished their firearms at me. Afterward, the commanding officer informs me that Sam is a wicked person. He reportedly assaulted his girlfriend so aggressively the night before, resulting in her being placed in the ICU for her injuries. They also informed me that Sam had a firearm and had concealed himself in the apartment near my residence. The building manager was informed by them that their access to the balcony in my place was necessary. They requested that I enter my bedroom and lock the doors while turning off the lights. Within the next 30 to 45 minutes, there was utter misery. After feeling panicked, I abandoned my kitchen counter and had to sit in my room to listen to the noise. Although no shots were fired, there was a lot of yelling and the sound of throwing objects. The chief officer knocked on my door after a prolonged absence, shortly after which he informed me that Sam had been apprehended. He expressed gratitude for the opportunity to let him use my apartment. After asking me questions for around 15 minutes, they departed. This is the final chapter in my expectations, but there's more to it than that. After Sam's detention, I became more anxious about his return to the apartment and my apprehension of revenge. My statement to the police wouldn't have been classified as incriminating, but I did mention the night of the altercation with my boyfriend. Sam came back to the building around 5 days after work when I was returning home one evening. He made an effort to get near me, but the elevator stopped functioning as he ran towards it. My whole body became tense, the sensation of almost being involved in a car accident, but narrowly avoiding it. Since then, I have completely avoided leaving my balcony and always kept the curtains shut. I went silent for a few weeks, and then we had our last conversation. I was about to board the elevator when Sam ran after me in the parking lot one night. He implored me to explain why I allowed the police to enter that night. I disclosed to him that I was in a state of depression, uncertain about what to do, and had recollections of being troubled by law enforcement. He became quite irritated with me and kept repeating the question, evidently anticipating an alternative response. When I was unable to provide the answer he sought, he offered me $3,000 to act as a character witness for him. My understanding of his behavior was matched only by my familiarity with him and his treatment of women. I was completely frightened and had no idea what to talk about. He informed me that his hearing was scheduled for the next Thursday morning and asked if I could attend. For the moment, I was like a deer in my headlights, but then I managed to get the hill out of my vision. The words were mumbled and seemed to be quite disjointed after that. The night prior to this trial, which was on Wednesday, upon returning from work, my cat appeared strange and had a puffy tail. Despite my efforts to remove it, I noticed through the curtains that there was an adhesive tape covering the outside of my sliding glass door. It was revealed that Sam had chosen to leave a message board with his phone number and name, as well as write in it, "I trust in you." Must be stated that I was not present. I snapped a picture of the post at Grab My Cat, then walked around my house and stayed with my mother for roughly 5 days. I reached out to the police to inform them about the recurrence of the incident on my balcony, but they never made any progress. After a while, my boyfriend came over and we went back to my house. Everything was as it should have been. Sam was never seen again. But a few weeks later, he encountered an unfamiliar woman who was cleaning his apartment. It was around a month before some new people moved in, and things have been fairly normal since then. I attempted to contact the police at the county jail to verify if he was back in custody, but no one provided any information. I hope that he is present if alleged to have done so by the police. I'm not entirely sure what happened, but my greatest regret is not calling the police when I felt like it should have. It is my wish that I never have to face you again. I moved to a new house with an amazing girl named Jess during the beginning of my junior year in college. Meg and I were smoking a blunt on the front porch after classes when this guy came by, our friend said. He proceeded to walk up my driveway, which was adjacent to the house where he resided. He said hi and asked if I knew Jess. I confirmed that she was my roommate, and we briefly exchanged pleasant words. He asked if he wanted to hit me with a blunt, and I obliged by taking one and continuing. Meg left while I was finishing some class on the porch, and a neighbor came out of his house and said hi to me again. He proceeded to my porch and then climbed the stairs. I didn't give much thought to it because he was extremely uneasy earlier. He proceeded to inquire about relationship tips, but his response was mostly bizarre. The girl I'm conversing with is simultaneously sending news and having a romantic relationship with another man. What's the reason for not doing that to me? I made an effort to be courteous, and then suggested that maybe she's not interested in him. He inquired about potential sexual partners and my interest in him after our first encounter. I had no intention of having a sexual encounter and didn't find him attractive, but I did convey my disinterest in the relationship through humor. He kept calling me beautiful and claiming that I was one of the most attractive girls he had ever encountered. The exchange became uneasy, so I stepped inside and informed him that I would come back later. I had just returned from spending time with a friend that evening. As she drove me away, my neighbor quickly left his door as I was opening it, almost like he was waiting for me. He rushed to my house and then placed himself up against mine, asking if I wanted to hang out. I declined, citing the fact that I had some classwork to complete before going to bed. He was extremely enthusiastic. If we can work together, we might be able to cuddle. I have consistently declined. After a while, he gave up and inquired about my sexual desires before asking if I would be willing to have sex with him. I persisted in deflecting and was actively attempting to depart. Despite my refusal to request a hug from him, he persisted. After that, he grabbed me and pulled me towards his arms, which made me feel terrible. I sprinted away, entered my house, and then proceeded to walk towards the door. My front door knocks, and I'm cooking in my kitchen after being here for a while. I was unsure of the person's identity as none of my friends were coming over. I reached my peak near the corner, and of course, it's the neighbor. My stomach began to swell up a bit. Instead of answering the door, I snuck into the bathroom and hid for a moment, hoping that I'd fall asleep. After 3 more knocks, there was silence. He suddenly starts calling out my name from the window that's open near my door. "What is Amy? Can you greet me?" "What is Amy? I'm aware that you're at home. I'll ask a couple of questions." "What is Amy? Whereabouts are you at the moment?" I was nauseous at this time. I sent a text message to my friend Corey, who lived in the nearby fraternity house, encouraging him to come over and play with me. Corey arrived and then met the neighbor at my doorstep. The conversation that I caught up with consisted of, "Is she currently in a relationship with someone else? She stated that she was only doing her homework tonight, but now she's inviting friends over. I'm wondering if she has feelings for me. Is it your opinion that she is? Who is the person in question?" I was able to get him in the house as quickly as possible because of Corey's exceptional deflection skills. The neighbor had urged me to leave promptly. I did it because I felt more secure behind the door with Corey in closer proximity. He inquired about the same question he had asked before, and then ended the conversation with, "May I request a hug?" I arranged for me to meet him later and then proceeded to enter the house. The following day, Jess came back from her boyfriend and I revealed to her about our strange neighbor. Surprisingly, she was aware of his actions. Like me, he had been waiting outside the door for her many times, watching her run around and trying to hug and hang out with her. Eventually, Jess shared my experiences with our neighbor with her boyfriend, and he proceeded to have a conversation with him. I'm not entirely sure what he said, but the neighbor never looked at me again. The situation would have been much worse if I hadn't made the first move until Jess. Despite knowing that many people have had much worse stories than me, the thought of it always makes me feel sick to my stomach. When I was 15 years old, me and my parents had just moved into a new apartment and we decided to get a puppy. Despite taking him for walks at least 4 or 5 times a day, my dog still had separation anxiety. I thought that my neighbors would experience hell for the first few weeks, as he would bark and cry whenever we left him alone. My neighbors were always understanding and told us not to worry about it since they rarely hurt him. Tony is the only one. On a Saturday, I was alone at home when someone knocked on my door. Tony was the individual in question. At first, it was a bit of pity to see me open the door, but then he smiled and said, "Let's hope you can bring your parents over when they come home." I said yes, and then he went. It went unnoticed by me. Upon my parents' return, I shared my experience with Tony while my dad visited his residence, thinking it might have been due to my dog's barking. My dad was informed by Tony that my dog was a barker and needed to rest during the day, so he would be grateful if we could find soothsayers to reduce his noise levels. Despite acknowledging that it was challenging to manage a dog's barking, he acknowledged. He expressed remorse for showing up at our door and admitted to being unaware of my presence in the room. My dad stated that they had a pleasant and polite exchange. After apologizing for the inconvenience, my father returned home and we attempted to alleviate my dog's anxiety, which was successful. My dog's barking was still present, but it wasn't as disruptive as before. Fast forward a few weeks, Tony's sudden movement down the stairs in our apartment building would make my dog frightened. Despite being a friendly dog, he harbored intense animosity towards him and stopped communicating with Tony. Whenever we crossed paths with him, he would either ignore us or focus on our gaze. Upon our arrival home, I and my mother noticed 6 holes on the side of our apartment door. The door was punched with a key or sharp object. My mother was quite unintelligent in regards to it. She suspected that we may have caused harm during our time there, which lasted for several months. One of my neighbors, Martha, contacted my mother and expressed concern about me, later asking her if I had been alone at home that afternoon. After my mom declined, Martha informed us that someone had been banging and kicking open our door, which was so terrifying that her 11-year-old son went into hiding under his bed for 4 hours. A few weeks later, my parents and I went to a city fair in the evening with Martha and her family. We returned earlier than 11 p.m. At approximately 12 a.m., someone rang our doorbell. My dad went to investigate, but nobody gave a response. Unless it occurs, we must either go to the window or descend stairs because it's usually the mailman. My dad didn't go down the stairs because it was midnight, which he found to be strange. He largely disregarded it and we all went to sleep. Upon their return from the fair, Martha is informed by my mother that Tony was found hiding under the stairs with a Gargantua baseball bat in his arms. He appeared anxious, but mentioned that a person had raised the doorbell and found it peculiar that someone would do so late in the night. Using a baseball bat, He came downstairs to investigate the identity of the person. My mother was immediately cognizant of what had occurred. He sounded the doorbell, anticipating my dad to come downstairs and discover the person in question. I'm not entirely sure if he had intentions of attacking my father, but his absence during the week was worrying for me and my mother. When they went upstairs, they were filled with fumes and knocked on Tony's door. Tony appeared to be fainting from the moment he saw my father, I kid you not. Tony burst into tears after my father confronted him. He disclosed to my father that he indulged in drugs on occasion and was uncertain about his behavior. He expressed remorse for harming us with a dangerous pocket knife and for the incident that occurred the previous night. He was honest about it. Tony's habit of waiting until the building staff had left for work resulted in my dog barking excessively and becoming more aggressive towards my door, rather than being a response to his anxiety. My dad remarked calmly, "This is the final opportunity I have to converse with you. Whenever you come across me or my family again, I will make it very clear when you approach me. Are you able to interpret the situation?" He couldn't stop crying and making an effort to hug my dad. We considered contacting the police, but eventually we lost sight of Tony. It was discovered that his wife had ejected him and considered restraint when she and their daughter were sleeping because they noticed him staring at them, and the house smelled like gasoline. After a short time, we relocated and never saw Tony again. Just a bit of background information. My upbringing was not in a major city, unlike many others. It is the largest city in my state and has a well-deserved reputation for violence and crime. I resided on the outskirts of one of the city's most challenging neighborhoods. I resided in the trailer park situated in front of the bar next door. The bar had a somewhat negative image and was shut down multiple times due to unrelated violence. Reopening was always a challenge, provided that the venue's name was changed. I'm still in the dark about the reasoning behind that rule. However, I was familiar with encounters with unpleasant individuals unexpectedly appearing and interacting with different neighbors who had advised me to stay away. It was just the way I had been there since I was young. I had the impression that life was working in that particular way. The people were perilous. It's best to avoid it. Our trailer had a fence on one side that separated us and the bar, and there was another trailer that belonged to people who were never home, abandoned, or for ice time. I was with a single mother and her daughters who were both younger than me. In those years, it acted as a barrier against anything that could be dangerous. My life was transformed when the unsettling neighborhood took over after the single mother and her children were removed. My age during freshman year of high school was approximately 13 to 14 years old. My life at home was not entirely dependent on materialism, but due to my lack of knowledge and naivety, I only recently discovered that it wasn't the usual experience for others. Despite being younger, the girls were my only friends in the park, and it was a great sadness to lose them. This man moved in after my landlady had probably carried out some illegal evictions a few years prior. He was the only one technically living there, but for the first year or so, I would frequently see him in his yard with a group of men. My adolescent brain recognized them as old but younger than my parents. It's likely that the individuals were a combination of those in their late 20s and mid-30s. Their inebriated demeanor was quite similar to that of the bartenders from the other side. From the moment he arrived, things were quite uneasy. Unfortunately, the initial awkwardness was caused by my stepfather's terrible behavior. His racist beliefs were met with pride and amusement by him. Black was the color of the new neighbor. A 6-foot fence was erected between our trailers in approximately 2 weeks. He refused to tolerate a new neighbor on our property's narrow, 1-foot-wide expanse, making them irrelevant. It was evident that he took great pleasure in saying insulting things while we were building. Our new neighbor never raised any concerns about his words or the ridiculous fence. Upon our arrival home, he was always polite and would wave at any time. The sensation of gilded and brisk feeling made me feel pretty much indebted to this stranger. In spite of my stepfather's resentment, they were kind and showed kindness towards us. Regrettably, the exact response facilitated an extremely hazardous situation. Even before the fence was completed, He and his friends would always move closer to the front of his trailer if they saw me checking the mail alone. I was responsible for checking the mailbox, which was a community box in the middle of the park. I would depart for the mailbox, and they could either be positioned on the porch or in the yard. It was inevitable that I would return to them and gather in the front or driveway area. He would greet me and his friends would simply stare and laugh. I've always harbored a great deal of fear towards unfamiliar individuals and those who follow religion. The fact that I would be afraid and uncomfortable around people I didn't know was a constant source of fear for my family. They were aware that I would eventually get over it, and they believed that my reaction would be comical as well. Neither I nor I have. Due to my gut's protection, I am no longer ashamed of feeling exhausted. I used to mumble hello, smile, and wave them around, but I'm afraid I would look uneasy since that's how I was. I assumed they were laughing because I looked very scared, but as time went on, I started to feel more comfortable greeting them and making eye contact. Even though they were laughing, it would make me feel uneasy again. I couldn't fathom what they were squabbling about. Was my voice, smile, and gesture indicative of something? Did my peripheral vision make me appear amiable? The most significant thing is that I hope they won't bother me during that time. One day, as I walked to the mailbox, the neighbor came running up to me and then accompanied me, which became a daily occurrence. As we walked, he would come to me and ask me common questions about our daily lives, school, and other related topics. It didn't appeal to me in any way. The level of anxiety I felt was higher than my usual level. Whenever he was near me, I would hear alarms. At that time, I didn't have a lot of self-belief. My fear of being paranoid about a nice guy who had never done anything wrong was so real that I couldn't help but feel guilty for my actions. Additionally, he neglected to double-check his own mail during these trips. It would have provided me with some comfort if he had it. It was expected that he would have come to the mailbox with me if it was just as necessary, given his need to check his mail in a single afternoon. The conversation shifted during these excursions. Once again, we were at the mailboxes, and he responded by saying, "I didn't mean to hurt your dad, but you have great legs," while observing me from above. I couldn't pinpoint the reason for it, but I simply wanted to take a shower and cry. It was clear to me that he should not have spoken like that. It was around 3 weeks ago that I ceased checking the mail. It took my parents a while to realize that, and I probably wasn't being honest when I shared it with them. There wasn't anything in the mailbox today. My mother had started yelling at me for being too lazy to go to the mail, and I finally let her know that I wasn't being lazy. The neighbor made me feel uneasy. He had been reported to have gone to the mailbox with me, and his words were explained to me. I must admit my mom thought it was hilarious. Her perception was that I was being unintelligent, reserved, and frightened of nothing. During dinner, she mentioned it and demanded that I disclose it to my stepfather. It was halfway between the two, and I thought maybe he would get it. Despite the neighbor's refusal to tell him, he must have been aware of something that wasn't acceptable. My stepdad muttered for a moment before saying, "You have nice legs, I'm told." I'm not sure what to ask. I felt embarrassed because it was evident that everything was fine and I just needed to get my act together. After re-examining the mail, I realized that the neighbor was no longer with me, which made me feel guilty because I didn't want to hear his thoughts. He was no longer spending time with a group of friends. He was seldom at home for a period, but he was always alone when pressed to leave. Let's consider the last few months. Whenever I was alone at home or checking the post, I started to see him without any prior notice. He would smile and wave to me, then enforce a sense of shame for overreacting. Nevertheless, during my shower experience on one evening, my mother slammed the door and then bellowed that I was cleaning the bathroom and that it would lead to mold growth on the carpet. I opened the shower window to let steam escape as I had done before by turning the crank several times. The window was only slightly taller than the shower wall, measuring only 5 inches in height and facing the front. Since I was 5 or 6 years old, I've been opening it every day while taking a shower. The only thing you could see was the person's head while they were in the shower. Even if you were not looking, you would still need to be curious to notice it. Upon opening it, I heard something and then gazed down. Without hesitation, I stared into the eyes of my unsettling neighbors. I quickly averted my gaze as I felt like I was betraying the law by looking out. After that, I crouched down to try and cover my head and proceed with the shower, but I felt very exposed and uncomfortable. After a few minutes, I went back outside and checked the window to make sure it wasn't just an unfortunate coincidence. He was still there, leaning on his porch and hollering. When we regained our gaze, he smiled slowly. I shut the window and quickly finished. I constantly reminded myself that it was just a coincidence and that I was once again being foolish. After encountering it on 3 occasions, I initiated a swift cold shower to avoid opening the window. After the unpleasant shower episode, he started waiting for me outside my school on the way home. I would take a stroll with him from the bus stop, and he'd unexpectedly find himself in front of his trailer. In the beginning, it was only intermittent, but then it progressed to every day. He would enter my path and then obstruct me from accessing my front gate. He used to make small talk, as he had done many times during our walks to the mailbox. I would respond to his poem as much as possible, but also remind myself to take care of my dogs, since they had been inside my house all day while my parents were at work and I was at school. A girl who was roughly a year younger than me had settled into the park that was situated far from my place of rental around that time. She was affable, and we were in the same class, but our conversations were limited to talking points. Until one day, we got off the bus, and she instructed me to hold on. She inquired if I desired her to accompany me on my walk. The offer left me feeling surprised and bewildered, but I was also excited about the possibility of him avoiding me if I wasn't alone. After accepting her offer of rent, she inquired if I knew the unsettling stranger who lived next to me. Someone else thought he was creepy, but I was relieved and wanted to cry and laugh at the same time. She mentioned that she had questioned the landlord in their trailer about a week ago. Upon her departure, she observed me walking towards my house while he stood nearby. He began to walk with her and try to communicate verbally when he saw her. He proceeded to compliment her hair by saying that she had lovely hair. She instructed him to be reckless and then proceeded to return home. She and I created a routine where she would walk me to my driveway, and then I would stand on my porch until she turned onto the corner, which we could not see. After school, he stopped waiting for us. There were no unusual occurrences for a couple of weeks. My new friend only traveled on the bus in the afternoon, and it was dark when I left for the morning commute due to fall. He observed me departing for the bus one morning and then urged me to have a good day. Since then, he was always present when I would leave the house. Due to my parents' early work, I was typically the only one without company from 5:30 a.m., and it was evident that their vehicles were absent. He used to pretend to have an activity on the road at first, but then he would react in shock when I saw him. In front of his house, Vinny was waiting. I went to school in costume for Halloween. My age made me enjoy most of the costumes that are sold in bag form at Party City or Walmart. It was, of course, somewhat revealing. Everything was erratic, and I felt like a midnight spider witch or something else. My attire was made to fit me better, with a long sleeve that reached my ankles. The cut was somewhat low, and the side had a higher gap than I would prefer. I waited patiently, looking out the small shower window, and didn't forget my regular time. I observed him enter his house, and then I went to avoid it. He eventually caught up with me before I even crossed his driveway. He made some disturbing comments about me being a nice kid, and then cautioned me to be cautious with boys. I hurried towards the bus stop, signaling with my shoulder that I would not make it. In the mornings, he would then wait in my driveway and at my gate. After getting ready for school, I would check my window, and he was present, which was almost always the case. He pacified in both directions and let out a whistle. I used to glance at him every morning, but then he would touch my shoulder or put his hand on my back. I essentially started to forego school to avoid him. At work, I would phone my mom and inform her that I didn't make it or that the bus arrived earlier. My friend would occasionally pick me up to ensure I went to school while he was learning how to drive. When I got in the car and we drove past, my neighbor would retreat to his own driveway and look at us with a wide-eyed gaze. After missing almost a week of school, I arrived at his house and found him in his driveway with 3 other men waiting for me. I was walking past him when he called out to me. I waved him, but kept on walking. He halted me and then informed me that he had a gift for you since you were unwell at home. You can count on me to get you. He then proceeded to give me something that resembled a door hanger. Beadwork was used to make him, and he had my name on it, with the colors matching the exact color scheme in my bedroom. At this juncture, I was completely overwhelmed with indescribable anxiety. I had a strange sense of relief that my name was not within his grasp until that day, as he had never even mentioned it. He had never even been present in my home for a second, which I was unaware of. My stepfather, who was racist, wouldn't have permitted a man, and my mother was too scared to let him. My bedroom had 2 large windows in the front of the trailer, but my cat Self was too scared to open any blinds or curtains, even for a few seconds, due to being unaware of their presence. My room didn't have a color scheme that was easy to predict. After that, I uttered something that was more of a thank you and entered the room while he and his friends watched me go by and laughed. I brought it to school the next day and I cried for my friends. Even though they didn't actually hurt me, some of them believed I was being overly paranoid and that he was just a nice guy with weird characteristics. Some of them concurred with me that it was entirely inappropriate and had a negative impact. My friend, who would sometimes give me rides, was worried about the guy's angry behavior when I gave him some. Essentially, that same friend picked me up and brought me home from school for the rest of the year. I made an effort to avoid being alone in my house from that point on. After a few months, I secured employment and made the decision to leave university and pursue my GED, as well as reduce my home time. There were a few awkward moments where we had to deal with different situations. Your well-defined physique is in line with men's preferences. It's important to keep in mind not to lose that number. I found it effortless to distance myself from him after receiving support from my friends. A plot twist has occurred. Life had transformed for me in numerous ways by the time I experienced the gift incident, which occurred approximately 3 years later. My stepfather was detained by the FBI and subsequently imprisoned in a federal facility. My mother had to live alone in the trailer, as I had already moved there. On a recent phone call, she inquired about your opinion on Bobby. When I replied I was unaware of Bobby's identity, she made a comment. "He's been living next door for years, can you believe it? Your father had a strong dislike for him." I chuckled and then grumbled, I'm not you, but some creepy neighbor." Naturally, I find him to be creepy. An awkward silence followed by her commenting, "He may have kissed me today. I have a feeling for him." I reminded her of the leg comment and other instances where he seemed unsettling to me, while also dealing with a long queue and disconcerting silence. What did she reply to? "Oh, I know how you feel. You're always afraid of people. It's possible that you had a crush on him without realizing it. Spoiler warning. Although they didn't work out romantically, he made an effort to become a squatter in her trailer and was coerced into being removed. Yes, my neighbor Bobby is a creepy,